This was Britain in 1952. The great smog of London rolled over the city, subjecting many to high levels of pollution. Almost 100 years later, this was Britain in 2030. A shinier future, but not necessarily a healthier one. Air pollution was at an all-time high, and as our lungs started to fail, we looked for other methods to survive. The oxygen market took the world by storm as people began to buy clean air so that they could live in this polluted world.
The oxygen market really began to grow economically after the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Research showed at the time that lower air quality in cities was directly related to the higher death toll in metropolitan areas. There was a fear that without clean oxygen, our bodies would begin to fail in a huge number of ways. The oxygen market grew out of this fear, and while it certainly became an economic powerhouse, people began to realise that oxygen was being classed as a commodity rather than a human right. The wealthy were able to buy higher quality oxygen, thus directly impacting their baseline health status, whereas the working classes were stuck with impure oxygen or even had to go without because of the rising costs of the service.
But as pandemic after pandemic hit the British people,
it is completely unimaginable, and we're not at the peak yet.
There was a push to imagine a world in which we weren't so reliant on our physical bodies, which so often failed us. And soon that world became a reality. The ingenious leaf lungs, pioneered by maverick designers, were released to the public and quickly became the defining invention of a new generation.
The human respiratory system functions in this way. The oxygen in the air is inhaled through the nose and mouth, and then it goes into the lungs, where clusters of cells called alveoli transfer the oxygen molecules into the bloodstream, where they convert to glucose to release energy. Plants, however, function differently. Sunlight is converted into glucose rather than into oxygen. It does this through this palisade mesophyll, which captures light and turns it into glucose. The spongy mesophyll on the bottom absorbs CO2, which is key to the process of photosynthesis. And the leaf lungs function in more or less the same way. The interior structure of the leaf lungs mimics the interior structure of a leaf. It has a casing that allows photons through, and on the interior there are two layers, a sort of synthetic palisade mesophyll layer and a spongy mesophyll layer. They collect the sunlight and CO2 to produce glucose to power the human body.
But the leaf lungs changed more than just how we breathe. They have also changed the landscape of our cities.
The city was way more grey, and most people just stayed inside all day, and there were loads of houses everywhere. It was super built up. And I guess now, being a bit older, I can see the changes that have happened in the city. It's much more green. We spend a lot more time outside. The mayor's invested more money in parks and that sort of thing, so there's just so much more green area.
The leaf lungs ultimately are biological lungs that have a similar structure to the plant life that we see all around us. Plants really can't survive in areas of high pollution, and the leaf lungs are similarly affected.
In my free time, I like to do pretty much normal teenage things, we have parties. My mum told me that when she was young, we used to have parties in the night, which just seems weird now. I guess that was probably before the leaf lungs, but we prefer to have parties in the daytime. You get a lot more you just feel a lot lighter and able to breathe. So this summer when I finish school, I'm gonna spend time with my friends outside the city. We're actually going to a festival which is in the forest just outside the city. There are about 200 to 300 people, which is a lot of people. Actually, my mum told me that before, when she was young, there'd be festivals with hundreds of thousands of people, which is just insane. But I think we all prefer to be in a slightly smaller group, and yeah, just have time with the music and being outside, being surrounded by all the trees and everything. So that's why I'm really looking forward to that this summer.
Unlike previous generations, where the youth wanted nothing more than to go to underground parties at enormous festivals, young people now prefer smaller gatherings deep in the forests, surrounded by nature, where their lungs can work most effectively and they can enjoy themselves. But big questions are still being raised about these leaf lungs. What are they doing to our bodies in the long term? And is their competition with the oxygen market a great equaliser, or the destruction of hundreds of jobs and livelihoods?
I was made redundant. By October, I had nothing left.
I lost my job thanks to leaf lungs. So I chose to invest most of my money into the oxygen corporations. And then when leaf lungs began to rise, the government invested a lot of money into it because it was sustainable. And I pretty much lost every penny I had.
Your every waking moment is worrying about where your next meal is going to come from.
Where's your next meal going to come from?
Who knows?
And the argument against the leaf lungs isn't just economical. Some people believe the leaf lungs are an infringement on their individual freedoms.
I don't wear leaf lungs because I'm a huge believer in freedom of choice. I choose what I want to do with my body. Think of all of the things that could be wrong with leaf lungs, and we would have no idea. For at least 60 years, any invention that needs humans or affects humans in some way has to be tested.
This is only the beginning for the invention that has changed our lives so much. And how will the leaf culture continue throughout the latter half of the 21st century? Well, that's something we will have to discover at a later date. But for now, this has been A Window into Modern Britain, Spotlight on Leaf Culture.